Hello, everybody. Welcome to St. Clement's in Ewell. I'm Father Alexander, and it's our last session on St. Mark. I'm looking at this cake box. What's in this cake box? Where did it come from? Well done. We can keep it for Saturday when we do the gardening. We don't need it now, surely. Look, we've just been given a beautiful cake. Mmm. Oh, the smell is delicious. Poor you sitting there watching that at home, eh? You're not going to get any. Anyway, let's let us cakes keep, don't they? Oh, are you sure? Okay. Um, yes, for the begging. Now, should we shut the door? Okay. Now, okay, we're not going to. When it was all, this is the close of St. Mark's Gospel. Now, as you know, the ending of a book is always incredibly important. Sometimes when you're writing a book, I'm sure you found this, it's quite hard to know how to end it. And if, let's say, you're writing a thriller or something, the end is the whole book is going to depend on the end. If you muck up the end, the whole book collapses. How many of you have seen the film The Shining? Oh, you need to watch it. It's the most frightening film ever made. It has a very enigmatic end, which everybody is discussing. How many of you have seen the television series The Sopranos? Yes. They had a very enigmatic end as well. Okay. How many of you have read Jane Eyre and know the last line? Reader, I married him. It's the last line of Jane Eyre. Most famous last line, I think, in literature. And how many of you have read, what's that thing? A Tale of Two Cities. It is a far, far better rest to which I go than that which I have ever known. It's a far, far better thing that I have done, that I am doing, than that which I have ever done, or something like that. It is absolutely sublime, the ending of Tale of Two Cities. Have you read Tale of Two Cities? Nobody's read Tale of Two Cities. I mean, like all Dickens's books, it's pretty rambunctious. But the ending is sublime. The ending makes the book, I think. Now, the ending of St. Mark makes the book. This is my little thesis. When it was already evening, since it was the day of preparation, the day before the Sabbath, Friday, Joseph of Arimathea, a distinguished member of the council, who was himself awaiting the kingdom of God, like the reader, came and courageously went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Courageously. You get very few adverbs in the gospel. So he's saying Joseph of Arimathea, who was looking forward to the kingdom of God, just like the reader, he showed a bit of guts. He was courageous in dealing with the Roman authorities. Just as you should be if you're the reader. Pilate was amazed that he was already dead. He summoned the centurion and asked him if Jesus had already died. I think that, again, has the ring of truth. I can't believe it. I can't believe it, he said. Go and get the centurion who was in charge of this and ask him. Yeah, they were testing, if you could hear it, we're testing our sound system. And when he learned of it from the centurion, so it must have been right, Jesus did actually die on the cross. The centurion wouldn't have told a lie. This takes away from all the rubbish you've read about, oh, Jesus didn't really die on the cross, which is a myth and a fake history. He gave the body to Joseph. Having bought a linen cloth, he took him down. Presumably he had to rush to the shops to buy the linen cloth because the sun was going down, preparation day, everything would have shut at dusk. He wrapped him in the linen cloth and laid him in a tomb that had been hewn out of the rock. Then he rolled a stone against the entrance to the tomb. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of Joses, watched where he was laid. Now, this again has the ring of truth. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of Joses, did not know Joseph of Arimathea. They didn't take part in the burial. In other words, Joseph of Arimathea, a stranger, stepped in and buried the corpse of Jesus before sundown in a hurry. Jesus died at 3 p.m. and therefore sundown would have been about 6. 3 hours is not very long to arrange for the disposal of the corpse. And the tomb was hewn out of the rock, so it was quite a nice tomb. And indeed, you could see the Holy Sepulchre today, and that is the tomb. It's almost certain, 99% certain, that the Holy Sepulchre is the tomb of Jesus. And it was outside the city in those days. It was very close to where Jesus was crucified. And near the Holy Sepulchre are various first century tombs. Now, when the Sabbath was over, Sunday morning, crack of dawn, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, so that was another Mary, and Salome, who on earth was she, doesn't say who they were, but presumably these people would have been known to the early readers. You didn't need to put a footnote because everybody would have known, oh yeah, Salome, we all know who she is. And of course, as you know, in those, they had very few names, the Jews. Something like 1/3 of the female population was called Mary. 1/5 of the male population was called Simon. It's a bit like modern Wales, northern Wales, where 80% of the population is called Jones. And so they all have a nickname, Jones the this, Jones the that, and Jones the other. Okay, now, very early on, when the sun had risen, so the Sabbath is over, on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb. They were saying to one another, who will roll back the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb? When they looked up, they saw that the stone had been rolled back. It was very large. On entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, which is the lucky side, clothed in a white robe, and they were utterly amazed. Now, who is this white young man? Not an angel, please note, a young man. We've met him before, who was wearing a bed sheet, which he left in the hands of those who tried to grab him and ran away naked. Now he's dressed, and now he is the author of the gospel, appearing in his own book, and he's saying to them, do not be amazed. They were utterly amazed. We also had Pilate was amazed earlier on. And what does amazed mean? Well, I'm amazed. It's a word that's largely lost its meaning. I think what it really means, could not understand, dumbfounded, in shock. It's quite a strong word. It's been watered down for us. And they were utterly amazed. He said, do not be amazed. They didn't understand. He said, don't be amazed. This is understandable. Now, this is rather important. Religion is something understandable. The message of Jesus is something understandable. The miracles of Jesus are understandable. And the greatest miracle of Jesus, raising himself from the dead, is understandable. Do not be amazed. You see Jesus of Nazareth, the crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Behold the place where they laid him. But go and tell his disciples and Peter, he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him, as he told you. Now, it's something I've only just realized after many years of reading the Gospels, that in one of the Gospels, Jesus says goodbye to the disciples in Jerusalem. Whereas in the other Gospel, St. Mark and also one of the other ones, I think possibly St. Luke, he says goodbye to the disciples in Galilee. So it is a bit of a contradiction. There you will see him as he told you. Then they went out and fled from the tomb, seized with trembling and bewilderment. They said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Trembling, bewilderment, fear. Now, trembling, literally, they were trembling. In other words, they began to shake. They were in such shock that they began to, shake. There's no reason why that shouldn't be taken literally. Now, people shake when they're in severe shock. Were you a nurse, Rita? No. Were you? No. Anybody? Well, apparently that's one of the things you do when you go into deep shock. You start shaking. And you have to wrap them up and get them to lie down and so on. So, and seas were trembling and people, they ran. They went out and fled. They ran for their lives. And then it says, they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Now, and that is the end of St. Mark's Gospel, which is the most brilliant ending of any book of all time. Better than Reader, I Married Him and all the other ones. Now, the ending leaves us with a very big question. If they told nobody, how come I'm sitting here reading the book being told that Jesus has risen? So the obvious deduction is they told nobody until they later changed their mind and told people. They were told to tell Peter and the disciples, so presumably they went and told Peter and the disciples, and those disciples told other people, who told other people, who told you, told me. The reader of the gospel, the first readers of the gospel, would have been one generation away from Jesus. We are presumably almost 30 years as a generation. So, how many 30 years are there in 2,000 years? At least 100 generations, isn't there? No, less than 100 generations. Anyway, the other thing is they were afraid and they kept silence. So they lost their fear and they developed the ability to speak. And they did what they were told and they told people. So I think this is very important because what it's saying to the reader is, you may be afraid right now, and you may be uncertain, you may be amazed, you may be dumbfounded, you may even be shaking, but somehow or another, you will change your mind and you will become a herald of the gospel, just like those first women. Now, of course, the other thing is, women were not creditable, they weren't credible witnesses for the Jews. A woman's evidence was not worth as much as a man's evidence. And so when the young man tells the women, why doesn't he go and find some men and tell them? Well, the men were all in hiding. So God, Providence, deliberately selected the women to be heralds of the gospel. This shouldn't surprise us or whatever. And it probably is a sign to us that the early church was a heavily female church. Obviously, there were apostles and so on, and disciples and so on, who were men, but there were also lots of female helpers as well. And all the work, as usual, was done by women. So it's true. Until very recently, all the work in the Catholic Church was done by women. It was done by the nuns, wasn't it? Do you remember the nuns? Where have they all gone now? They've all died off. It's very sad. But there was something like, I think when I was a little boy, there was supposed to be 1 million nuns in the church. Or was it 100,000 nuns? I think it was 1 million nuns. Was there yeah, out of 1 billion Catholics, 1 million nuns. 1 in 1,000 was a nun. I don't know. There are quite a lot of African places like that, but in Britain, most young children have never seen a nun. It's terrible. It is terrible. It's a great loss. But you see, the original and the nuns go back to apostolic times, because St. Paul talks about the consecrated virgins and the widows, who were sort of formed a discrete group of the church. And they were people whose husbands had died, and they were not getting remarried, and they were dedicating themselves to the life of the church. And so, that was a feature. Now, of course, one of the things is that in Roman religion, the women had no part at all. They just stayed at home. It was Roman religion was very much to do with the state. Women could, if they wanted to, go off and join a mystery cult. And that was very much frowned upon, joining a mystery cult, because the mystery cults were for hysterics and they were mainly of foreign inspiration, Egyptian and things like that. And also, for example, there was a cult of, what was her name? El Gabal. Do you remember the family of Septimius Severus had a lot of very powerful women in it? Julia Domna, Julia Masia, and Julia somebody else. And they were all priestesses of the sun god of Homs in Syria. And that gave the family of Septimius Severus a very bad reputation, because it meant that these women were running the Roman government, essentially. So, and the men who they used. Elagabalus and Alexander Severus were just sort of, ciphers, and these women were running the Roman Empire. That was actually when women did run the Roman Empire. During the time of Augustus, and Livia did not run the Roman Empire. That's a fiction made up by, what's his name, the guy who wrote I, Claudius. But in the time of after Septimius Severus, with his young relatives, Julia Domna was running the Roman Empire. And she was a foreigner. She was from Syria, and she was a priestess of this cult of the sun god. That was very much frowned upon, because don't forget, the ultimate woman from the East who had a funny cult around her was Cleopatra. They hated Cleopatra with a passion because she was just, bad news. And similarly, Christianity comes from the East, and it's full of women, and they're all hysterical. Bad. You see, one of the Roman prejudices against Christianity would very much have fitted into that. They're very much against women, they're against Eastern women, and they're against Eastern cults. It was considered very bad. You remember the Emperor Titus wanted to marry Berenike, who turns up in the Bible, and he was told he couldn't, and he didn't, because he knew it would have been political suicide, because she was like Cleopatra. So these women, I think what you see in the Gospels, you see the rehabilitation of religious women, because none of them are hysterics, and none of them are sort of caught up in nasty cults and things like that. They're all respectable people. And that's one of the messages of the gospel. Christianity, even though it comes from the East, is a respectable religion. Do you think Christianity is a respectable religion?
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas, of course, something like we still have cults, and they're bad. Okay. Now, that is the ending of the gospel. So it's an invitation to the reader to believe, to have courage, and to pass on the message. Now, it's almost like those chain letters you used to get. Make sure you pass this on to somebody else, and so on and so forth. He is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him as he told you. But he doesn't tell us what goes on in Galilee, because that next chapter is the chapter that is going to be written by the reader of the book. Not the author of the book, the reader of the book. What you've got here is the author of the book, the young man dressed in white sitting on the right-hand side, passing on to the reader what's the word I'm looking for? The mission to carry on the story. Now, after St. Mark had finished his work of genius and left it like that, somebody of lesser talent came along and thought, I don't like this ending, I'm going to write another ending. And that other ending is what we've got in brackets over here. Now, you may have heard of, have you ever heard of a guy called Nahum Tate? He wrote the very famous Christmas carol, When Shepherds Watch Their Flocks by Night, or Seated on the Ground. He was a very famous poet. He wasn't a very good poet, but he was a very famous poet in the time of Charles II, I think, something like that, slightly after Charles II. He took King Lear, and because he thought the ending of King Lear wasn't good enough, where King Lear comes in with his dead daughter in his hands, and then he himself dies, he rewrote it and gave King Lear a happy ending. Have you seen King Lear?
Yes.
Yeah. Have you seen King? Yeah. Have you seen King Lear? So he gave it a happy ending, and the happy ending version of King Lear lasted for about 150 years. Nobody saw King Lear as it was meant to be until I think about the 1850s. He thought he knew better than Shakespeare.
So everyone thought that was the original thing?
No, I don't think so. No, because the text, according to Shakespeare, was still in existence. But when you went to the theatre, you got Nahum Tate's version. Anyway, this person is the Nahum Tate of the Gospel. And he says, well, I don't like this ending. It leaves things hanging, because he's completely missed the point of the ending. And so we better provide an ending. His ending is, in fact, what you call an epilogue. What did they all do next? What happened next? And you often have this in books, what they all did afterwards, you know. When he had risen, early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had driven 7 demons. She went and told his companions, who were mourning and weeping. When they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they did not believe. After this, he appeared in another form to 2 of them walking along on their way to the country. Now, that's the 2 disciples going to Emmaus. Now, this person who's written this has read the Gospel of St. Luke, which is posterior to St. Mark, and also probably read the Gospel of St. John, which is also much posterior. He appeared first to Mary Magdalene. After this, he appeared, but later, as the 11 were at table, he appeared to them and rebuked them for their unbelief. That again is in St. John, and hardness of heart, because they had not believed those who saw him after he had been raised. He said to them, "Go into the whole world and proclaim the gospel to every creature." That's from St. Matthew. "Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved. Whoever does not believe will be condemned. These signs will accompany those who believe. In my name they will drive out demons, they will speak new languages, they'll pick up serpents with their hands, and if they drink any deadly thing, it will not harm them. They will lay hands on the sick, and they will recover." So then the Lord Jesus, after he spoke to them, was taken up into heaven and took his seat at the right hand of God. That's the ascension from the Acts of the Apostles, and also from St. Luke. But they went forth and preached everywhere, while the Lord worked with them and confirmed the word through accompanying signs. Now, this epilogue is completely different in style to the rest of St. Mark's Gospel, and everybody can spot that. So it's added by a later hand. What's interesting is what he felt that needed to be put into it. And as many of you have been to the United States, and many of you, while you were in the United States, perhaps went to a snake handling church. Have you heard of snake handling churches? Yes. And what happens is they bring out poisonous snakes, and people pick them up and walk around with poisonous snakes. And you sometimes have a guy preaching, sort of with lots of writhing snakes wrapped around him, because it says in St. Mark's Gospel, they will pick up serpents with their hands, and if they drink any deadly thing, it will not harm them. We don't yet have people who drink poison just to show that they come to know how. We do have snake handling churches. And unfortunately, I believe in snake handling churches, quite a few people have actually died, haven't they? Gosh. We are not going to introduce that here yet for the foreseeable future. But I mean, it's incidentally, the person who wrote this was very late, because the person who wrote this clearly knew the Acts of the Apostles. In the Acts of the Apostles, St. Paul goes to Malta after he's been shipwrecked. He lands at St. Paul's Bay, and they gather sticks because they're all wet and it's cold and so on. It's February, and they put the sticks. He puts his sticks as he gathered onto the bonfire, and a snake comes out of the sticks and bites St. Paul. And St. Paul has no harm is done to him, and the people assume, because they're very superstitious, that he is a god. That is the story that's there. And then, of course, what St. Paul did is he went there to see St. Publius, the leading man of the island. His father was unwell, and he went in to the father, laid his hands on him, and the father recovered. So they will lay hands on the sick and they will recover. So this person who's written this bit has read all the other Gospels and also read the Acts of the Apostles. Now, one of the things is in the Bible, many people find this hard to understand, but in the Bible, every single thing like that is an allusion. What you've read, you regurgitate in a slightly different form to prove what you read before. So, for example, Jesus himself does this because Jesus refers back to quite a few things that happen in the Old Testament. So, for example, Jesus refers back to the prophet Jonah There's something greater than Jonah here. The people of Nineveh repented when Jonah preached, but there was somebody greater than Jonah here. So Jesus obviously knew very well the prophecy of Jonah. Again, he talks about the Queen of the South will rise up with this generation and condemn it. He's imagining the last judgment, the courtroom. The Queen of the South will be called as a witness for the prosecution, it's basically saying. Who is the Queen of the South? The Queen of the South sounds like Beyonce or something like that, doesn't it? No, the Queen of the South is the Queen of Sheba. The Queen of Sheba, who came from, presumably she came from Yemen, is where they think, because that's where the incense grew, and she came up to. There's something greater than the wisdom of Solomon here. And presumably that's what they refer to the Queen of Sheba as, the Queen of the South. And there are many, many other. It was not like this from the beginning, man and woman and so on. Jesus had read the book of Genesis. In fact, you could probably look at all the words of Jesus and find and you could reconstruct his reading and say, well, he preferred this to that. But that's clear. And similarly, this person was very much taken with the story of St. Paul on the island of Malta, I think. But that's how it works. Shakespeare does exactly the same thing. Shakespeare tells us about his reading in his writing. Yeah, and of course St. Augustine does the same. St. Augustine regurgitates not regurgitates, you can see by a process of archaeology all the books that St. Augustine had read as a child, which have been distilled into his writings. Okay, I think we're going to finish there. What do you think? Is that enough? Okay, this one's a short one, but the ending of the book is brilliant. What the book is asking you to do is to make the ascent of faith. Ascent meaning yes, as opposed to ascent, climb. But it's also saying that the ascent of faith is a gradual ascent, insofar as the women said nothing to anybody for they were afraid, but they didn't stay afraid. They got over themselves, they got over their fear, and they gradually came to understand what had happened. It might have taken them a few hours, might have taken them a few days, might have taken them a few years, might have taken them the rest of their lives. Faith is a gradual process. You do have people coming to faith, as our Protestant brethren say, in the Bible very quickly, St. Paul being the obvious example on the road to Damascus. But in St. Mark's Gospel, it's clear that the coming to faith is slow. Again, the Neaniskos, the boy, the teenager, on Thursday evening he ran away naked into the night. On Sunday morning he's got his clothes back and he is properly dressed and he's speaking coherently and giving witness. So it took Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It took him 3 days to get his act together, but he got his act together. How did that boy get to the tomb? He got up in the middle of the night before the women and discovered it before they did, presumably, because he's not an angel, he is St. Mark. I'm not sure who St. Mark's mother was. Was she was quite an important person. Was she Salome? I'm not quite sure. Who was St. Mark's mother? I think it might have been Salome. But if that is St. Mark. Okay, so there we have it. We mustn't be afraid, or if we are afraid, be afraid, but we mustn't be afraid forever. Okay? Get your courage up and let it grow. There we are. We've finished. I hope you've enjoyed our talks on St. Mark's Gospel. Bye for now.